Welcome to Research Hub. If you are new to research, you have probably come across the concept of the elusive research gap, also known as a literature gap. In this video, we will delve into the complex subject of research gaps, defining what they are, examining the four most prevalent types of research gaps, and explaining how to identify an appropriate research gap for your dissertation, thesis, or research project. What exactly is a research gap? Well, at the simplest level, a research gap is essentially an unanswered question or unresolved problem in a field, which reflects a lack of existing research in that space. Alternatively, a research gap can also exist when there's already a fair deal of existing research, but where the findings of the studies pull in different directions, making it difficult to draw firm conclusions. For example, let's say your research aims to identify the cause, or causes, of a particular disease. Upon reviewing the literature, you may find that there's a body of research that points towards cigarette smoking as a key factor. But at the same time, a large body of research that finds no link between smoking and the disease. In that case, you may have something of a research gap that warrants further investigation. The four most common types of research gaps 1. The classic literature gap. First up is the classic literature gap. This type of research gap emerges when there's a new concept or phenomenon that hasn't been studied much, or at all. For example, when a social media platform is launched, there's an opportunity to explore its impacts on users, how it could be leveraged for marketing, its impact on society, and so on. The same applies for new technologies, new modes of communication, transportation, etc. Classic literature gaps can present exciting research opportunities, but a drawback you need to be aware of is that with this type of research gap, you'll be exploring completely new territory. 2. The disagreement gap. As the name suggests, the disagreement gap emerges when there are contrasting or contradictory findings in the existing research regarding a specific research question, or set of questions. The hypothetical example we looked at earlier regarding the causes of a disease reflects a disagreement gap. Importantly, for this type of research gap, there needs to be a relatively balanced set of opposing findings. In other words, a situation where 95% of studies find one result and 5% find the opposite result wouldn't quite constitute a disagreement in the literature. Of course, it's hard to quantify exactly how much weight to give to each study, but you'll need to at least show that the opposing findings aren't simply a corner case anomaly. 3. The contextual gap. The third type of research gap is the contextual gap. Simply put, a contextual gap exists when there's already a decent body of existing research on a particular topic, but an absence of research in specific contexts. For example, there could be a lack of research on a specific population, perhaps a certain age group, gender, or ethnicity. A geographic area, for example, a city, country, or region. A certain time period, perhaps the bulk of the studies took place many years or even decades ago and the landscape has changed. The contextual gap is a popular option for dissertations and theses, especially for first-time researchers, as it allows you to develop your research on a solid foundation of existing literature and potentially even use existing survey measures. Importantly, if you're going to go this route, you need to ensure that there's a plausible reason why you'd expect potential differences in the specific context you choose. If there's no reason to expect different results between existing and new contexts, the research gap wouldn't be well justified. So, make sure that you can clearly articulate why your chosen context is different from existing studies and why that might reasonably result in different findings. 4. The methodological gap. Last but not least, we have the methodological gap. As the name suggests, this type of research gap emerges as a result of the research methodology or design of existing studies. With this approach, you'd argue that the methodology of existing studies is lacking in some way, or that they're missing a certain perspective. For example, you might argue that the bulk of the existing research has taken a quantitative approach, and therefore there is a lack of rich insight and texture that a qualitative study could provide. Similarly, you might argue that existing studies have primarily taken a cross-sectional approach, and as a result, have only provided a snapshot view of the situation, whereas a longitudinal approach could help uncover how constructs or variables have evolved over time. Considering the volume of existing research, identifying research gaps can seem overwhelming or even impossible. I don't have time to read every paper published on public health. Similarly, you guys don't have time to read every paper. So how can you identify a research gap? There are different techniques in various disciplines, but we can reduce most of them down to a few steps, which are: 1. Identify your key motivating issue/question. 2. Identify key terms associated with this issue. 3. Review the literature, searching for these key terms and identifying relevant publications. 4. Review the literature cited by the key publications which you located in the previous step. 5. Identify issues not addressed by the literature relating to your critical motivating issue. It is the last step which we all find the most challenging. It can be difficult to figure out what an article is not saying. I like to keep a list of notes of biased or inconsistent information. You could also track what authors write as directions for future research, which often can point us towards the existing gaps. Don't forget like, share and subscribe my channel.